there you have it. Kamala Harris and Donald Trump just made their case to the nation for why they should serve in the White House for the next 4 years. I'm Michael Schnell. Thanks for joining us for America's Vote 2024. Joining me now is The Hill's editor-in-chief, Bob Cusack, and national political reporter for The Hill, Julia Manchester. Thank you both for joining us.
Hey, Michael.
So, Bob, I want to start with you, just right off the top, thoughts from the debate, more than 90 minutes, policy talk, personal jabs. What are your takeaways?
Well, it wasn't boring, that's for sure. I thought it was a very good move for Harris to extend her hand and basically say, I'm Kamala Harris.
First time since the Hillary-Trump debates.
Exactly. So I thought that was a good move. In the beginning, you know, Harris was really not answering questions. But as the debate went on, Trump got more defensive, and Harris definitely laid some bait out, and Trump took it. This was not a good night for Donald Trump, because what did Harris do? She went after the crowd size thing and how people were leaving his rallies bored, which of course is absurd. She doesn't know that, but she's playing a Trump trick on Trump. And then she said that world leaders are laughing at you. That's a Trump line that he later said. I thought it was a very good move for Trump to do, for Harris to do that. And he, toward the end, was kind of yelling. Harris had a very good night, was very composed.
Julia, same question for you. Main takeaways from tonight's event?
Yeah, so I 100% agree with Bob, and it was, you know, I think such a good night for Kamala Harris that just now her campaign is calling on a second debate. I think the Harris campaign was able to achieve the goal they really set out to achieve, to really create that contrast, to make her seem presidential and to get under former President Trump's skin. We saw a number of, you know, these zingers from Harris against Trump. One notable one was that when she said that Donald Trump was fired by 81 million people, obviously referring to the 2020 presidential election. At points, he seemed, you know, physically irritated, visibly irritated. Sometimes he wouldn't even look at her. He seemed uncomfortable. He seemed somewhat, you know, out of place, that he had been shaken. So, you know, not a good night for Donald Trump. And he also did land, you know, some personal attacks against Harris. You know, for example, calling her a Marxist, saying that her father is a Marxist professor. All of these attacks, while they may play well with his conservative base, they may play well at those Trump rallies, I don't know really how much they're going to impact or play well with those moderate independent swing voters. I think Harris right now, you know, on the debate stage earlier this evening, really presented herself as someone who was put together, who was warm, and someone who was really making her case for the first time on a presidential debate stage.
Yeah, Bob, I want to ask you something that was brought up beforehand. You know, will there be another debate? That's been the big question here. Folks are saying it's the first, but it may also be the only. I was talking to some members of Congress during the debate, and I heard from one House Republican really striking comments. This is a House Republican who supports former President Trump, said, I'm just sad. She knew exactly where to cut to get under his skin. Just overall disappointed that he isn't being more composed like the first debate. The road just got very narrow. This is not good. And I heard that from a few House Republicans. That being said, do you think former President Trump will want to get on the debate stage again with Kamala Harris? And on the other side of the coin, do you think the Harris campaign is going to push for more debates?
I definitely think Trump is definitely going to call for more debates, not just one, especially after this disappointing performance. You know, at first I thought Harris shaking her head was not working, but toward the end, maybe it was, because Trump, as you mentioned, Michael, she got under his skin. She touched his buttons, and that's exactly what her game plan was, and she succeeded in doing it. Now, if you're the Harris camp, what do you do? Do you accept another debate after this big performance? I think it depends on polls. But honestly, there are a lot of other questions that could be asked of both candidates. I hope there's at least one more debate. And honestly, I think there probably will be.
Julia, what's your take on that? Do you think there will be more debates? What are you hearing from the campaigns? What's the sense that you're getting?
Well, yeah, so the Harris campaign just called for, another debate. I mean, it's obviously been, they feel that this has been a very good night for her. She's been able to obviously successfully needle Donald Trump to get under his skin. And I think she was able also, just speaking from, looking at her specifically as a candidate, forget about Donald Trump for a second, she was able to lay out a number of these policy positions that she's been criticized for not being not being detailed enough about. She talked about the economy. The first part of the debate was very economy heavy. She talked about foreign policy, for example. She was pressed on the Afghanistan withdrawal. Donald Trump notably really dug in on immigration quite a bit throughout the debate. He's doing that because he knows that this is an issue that is a weakness for Democrats, and I think Harris, a lot of this probably had to do with delivery, the contrast with Trump, etc. But she seemed to have been able to at least hold her own, through that. So it's interesting because going back to the last presidential debate in June, before that, there was almost this debate over debates. Do presidential debates ultimately matter? And I think we're starting to see that post-Biden-Trump June 2024 debate, they really do matter. And, I think you're seeing that now that the Harris campaign is having a good night or had a good night, they want another one.
Yeah, and, it's all interesting. And it's funny because, folks typically say debates don't really matter in presidential elections. Well, that was sort of turned on its head after the June debate when President Biden stepped down after. This tonight seemed like it may be an effective one, so we'll have to see what comes. Bob, I want to head into some policy talk now. I thought that one of the more striking policy conversations was on the issue of abortion and women's reproductive rights. Former President Trump has come under fire for really not having a succinct message and stance on this. He had touted putting the justices on the bench who ended up overturning Roe v. Wade, and then he said he's going to talked about how he's going to vote in the Florida referendum, saying that he doesn't want his running mate said he wouldn't sign a total abortion ban. Trump sort of throwing Vance under the bus there during the debate, and then Harris really making the case to the American people. This has been an issue that she has been very good messenger on, the top messenger for the administration. I want to know what your takeaway on the abortion conversation was, and do you think that Trump tonight needed to sort of try to thread the needle on this issue? Do you think he did that?
Now, listen, I think he was defensive on abortion, though that was predictable. At the same time, on some of these issues on Afghanistan, Harris fended herself, and that, I mean, that was a botched withdrawal and a tragic situation, but her answer was fairly good on that. But let's be clear, on fracking, she has been anything but clear, and on a number of issues, she said she was going to go through them. She did not go through them, but that's not the story of this debate. The story is whoever wins, it's a referendum on Trump or Harris, and after this debate, it's a referendum on Trump because of his defensiveness. And that's not good for Trump. That's good for Harris.
Yeah, and Julia,
Michael,
it was kind of interesting when you talk about the referendum on Trump, the referendum on Harris. Trump kept trying to pull in President Biden. At one point, Vice President Kamala Harris saying, "Just want to remind you, I'm the one you're running against." Is it sort of the sense that maybe the Trump campaign and the candidate himself are longing for the days when they were running against President Biden, and when they had that successful debate, they saw him as sort of a different candidate than Vice President Kamala Harris? It seemed like those dynamics were on stage tonight.
Yeah, there's no question. I mean, even after, Joe Biden dropped out of the race, Kamala Harris became the presumptive Democratic nominee. We saw those leaked comments from J.D. Vance at a fundraiser saying it was a gut punch when Harris, became the presumptive nominee. So we've known that for quite some time. And I think, it's taken time for the Trump campaign to really adapt to Trump versus Harris race. And, they're still struggling to really define her at this point, not only define her, but also, struggling to adapt their message on issues like abortion. And I want to zero in on that for a second. It's not just Trump who has struggled to message on abortion. I would say Republicans up and down the ballot across the party have struggled to figure out a message that sticks in a post-Roe versus Wade world. And if you're a down ballot Republican, running in November and you were watching tonight's debate, debate. I'm wondering if you were, looking for some guidance on how you should message on this issue, maybe looking for an example that Donald Trump could set, someone who, has appeared somewhat moderate on abortion in the past, but his stance certainly shifts on that issue. I don't know, if you're a Republican running and abortion is an issue you're having to contend with, if you have that answer after tonight. So, definitely a lot of questions on that issue in particular. And that's obviously very important because we oftentimes hear, it's the economy, stupid, literally, and you see that playing out in the polls that it's a top issue for voters. But at the same time, in 2022, abortion was a major issue for voters, and we saw Democrats win big on that issue. So Donald Trump and Republicans need to figure out how they're messaging ahead of November, or they're going to have, once again, some, potentially some serious losses on that issue.
And Bob, another big issue that folks are watching out for tonight heading into the debate was the Israel-Hamas war. That has been a key vulnerability for the Biden administration. It was for the Biden campaign. Now Vice President Kamala Harris is taking that on. She reiterated the administration's position of wanting a two-state solution, expressing strong support for Israel's right to defend itself, but to do it in a proper way. And she also mentioned that she wants security for the Israeli people, but also equal measures for Palestinians. This is such a key issue, particularly in the swing state of Michigan. We saw that large uncommitted vote. A lot of folks were watching tonight to see how Vice President Kamala Harris would approach this very sensitive issue. Your take, how did she do that? And did she do enough to, keep support among folks who are supportive of Israel? Because with the debate in the Democratic Party, staunchly pro-Israel Democrats, but there are also the pro-Palestinian liberals who are concerned about the mounting humanitarian deaths in the Gaza Strip. How did she walk that tightrope tonight?
Well, she did what Biden has been trying to do. Biden has not been doing it successfully. If you look at Harvard-Harris polling, it's one of his worst issues because he's trying to play both sides, and she's definitely playing both sides. But for whatever reason, she's getting more of a pass, I think, from those who support the Palestinians, and I think that her answer was fine. I think on foreign policy, which is not a strength of hers, she did okay, and Trump didn't land the punches that he could have, even though he is up on foreign policy if you look at the polls. But overall, she just wants that to be kind of a draw, especially on foreign policy. And she's actually made up some ground on immigration. She's only single digits behind Trump now. That's a big deal.
And then, Julia, another issue that I want to get you on quickly is the 2020 presidential election. The results of that were relitigated again tonight. Former President Trump saying that when he said President Biden won by a whisker, he said he was saying that sarcastically. There have been folks, Republicans, who have been saying it's time to move on. Former President Trump clearly not ready to do that yet. How do you think that's going to play in Republican circles?
Yeah, so he's not ready to do that yet, clearly, like you said. But at the same time, look, it's a question that Republicans and Democrats are asking. If Donald Trump loses the 2024 presidential election, is he going to accept the results? And if he doesn't accept the results, what's going to happen? Are we going to have an event like January 6th? Are we going to have more of these legal challenges? Is there going to be another divide within the Republican Party on whether to accept those results or not? We just don't know, but it shows that Donald Trump's really, insistence on, in the past, casting quite a bit of doubt on those election results are continuing to haunt him. I think it's something that could turn off a lot of independent voters, swing voters that are watching if Democrats, continue to make this a big deal. It's interesting looking at all of the Republicans that have endorsed Kamala Harris, Dick Cheney, for example, Olivia Troy, Jeff Duncan, the former lieutenant governor of Georgia. A lot of them talk about January 6th. And I'm curious to see if that, thinking among those Republicans who have, switched camps, if that's going to be reflected in some of these center-right voters who just are sick of the chaos. It goes into this message from Harris and the Democrats who are saying, we are not going to be the chaos candidate. That's Donald Trump. You just have to look at the post-2020 election, what happened with the denial and the January 6th attack on the Capitol. That's how they create that contrast.
But, Julia, don't you think he missed an opportunity? Because, Trump could have countered, hey, Democrats support me. Tulsi Gabbard got more delegates in 2020 than Harris did. She got 2. Harris got 0. RFK Jr., who has obviously endorsed Trump, but he didn't counter. And in a way, obviously different situation, but there were a number of openings that I think Trump missed. And same, you know, you go back to June 27th, Biden wasn't countering at all. And I tell you one thing, Democrats are not missing Joe Biden right now. They made the right choice.
Absolutely. And I think that goes into Trump not being on his game tonight, Trump not being 100% on message. Like, you know, Tulsi Gabbard, RFK Jr., who was in the spin room at the debate, you would think he would be sort of the easy, I guess, vehicle Donald Trump could use to get that message across. He didn't. Instead, we heard him, you know, talk about, for example, January 6th, Ashley Babbitt, for example, and, you know, going into that, he seemed to go down a number of these rabbit holes. So I don't think he did himself any of these any favors.
All right. There's a lot more that we can discuss. We're going to have to leave the conversation there. Bob Cusack, Julia Manchester, thank you both so much for joining us.
Thanks so much.
Welcome back to America's Vote 2024. This is an extremely close presidential race. That's an understatement. It can all come down to who wins those key swing states. According to Decision Desk HQ, Harris is leading Trump in the battleground states except for Georgia. Joining me now is Chris Berg, the Vice President of Local Content and Nexstar Media Group, and Scott Tranter, Director of Data Science for Decision Desk HQ. Thank you both for joining us.
Hey, good to be here. Good to be here.
Thanks for having me.
Scott, I want to start with you. Who do you think gets the post-debate bump right here? We've spoken after all of these debates. What's your takeaway, and who do you think is going to get that momentum?
Well, interestingly enough, I think we're going to see the polls look like VP Harris won the debate, but I think a lot of these voters has already decided, so I'd be surprised to see any of these state-based polls move more than a point or two, which could be the difference, but I'm not expecting a 3, 4, or 5-point bump for either candidate after this debate.
And Chris, I want to get your takeaways right off the bat. What do you think of the debate tonight, and who do you think is going to come out of the debate after tonight with that momentum?
Oh my, I have so much to say about how this all went down tonight, especially on how it was ran by ABC. A couple of things for starters. Number one, kudos to the moderators. I thought they were very fair in how they managed the time. It's very difficult to go back and forth and try to keep on moving through the night. That's one of the hardest things to do when you're on the anchor desk. However, they are going to get beat up unmercilessly tomorrow by the Republicans because how many times they fact-checked Donald Trump versus the fact checks with Kamala Harris. And that is going to be a point that will be beaten they'll be beaten up for the next several weeks. And one of the things that was very striking to me when it comes to how they managed the questions, there were at least 2 questions to Harris where on the immigration side where there was no follow-ups to her on her role. She did not answer really the question. Some of these questions were excellent questions, but there were no follow-ups. And when you build a debate, it's the follow-up question that really makes the moment in time, and they did not follow up. And with Donald Trump, when Kamala Harris mentioned, you brought the Taliban to Camp David, there was a perfect moment in time to say, Mr. Trump, is that true? Did you bring the Taliban to Camp David? And have that answer happen in the moment. That's what really, truly makes a debate special. And I think they've missed moments in that point in time to kind of separate themselves out from other debates that are out there to get an answer to questions and bring additional knowledge to the public. A lot of talking points, not nearly as much kind of fact-based things that you hang your hat on in this debate as I would have liked to have seen.
Scott, I want to jump in here and ask you, I've been looking forward to asking you this question all throughout in the lead up to the debate. There was that New York Times Siena poll that came out that had a really interesting statistic. It said 90% of voters said they knew everything they needed to know about Trump, but a smaller percentage, 71%, said they knew everything they needed to know about Harris. She was pressed tonight on a lot of the issues, the flip-flops that she has made in recent years, and she sort of had to reintroduce herself. It was part of this reintroduction that she's been doing on the national stage, not as the vice president, but as the presidential candidate. Do you think that 71 number will increase after tonight's debate?
Yes, I absolutely do, especially if they watch the debate for at least 30 to 45 minutes. ABC did a good job of asking some of the big pressing questions in the first hour, things about why she switched her position on fracking, among other issues. Now, whether the voters like the answer or not, that's a different question. But look, the average voter only spends 5 or 10 minutes over the course of an election figuring out who they're going to vote for. And there was plenty of material tonight that they can choose from.
Chris, another question I want to ask you, one issue that we heard a lot about tonight was foreign policy, but polls have showed that that's really not at the top of the list for voters in some of these really key swing states, those areas where this election is going to come down to. What do you make of the dynamic, the strong focus on foreign policy issues, but sort of how it ranks in the importance of issues among some of those swing state voters?
Well, I kept track of all the questions tonight, and there were 9 economy questions, which ranks between 45 and 50% of the most important issue in every swing state. There were 10 foreign policy questions, and took about 10 minutes longer than the economy questions. And foreign policy questions are about 1% or less in interest for the swing states. So it was just stunning to me that they spent that much time knowing what the swing states really want to know about. A couple of things that I just also want to point out is that I was on the ground in Pennsylvania and in Michigan last week, and a couple of things that struck me. They are really in the know on the issues that are important to them. You talk to an average voter on the street, they are asking questions about what's important to them. And one of the things that kind of slipped through tonight was the very nuanced answer by Kamala Harris on her fracking position. We know in 2019 that she'd say she'd ban fracking, and she said tonight, as she said over through her surrogates and over the past couple of weeks, for the past 4 years, I've supported this position because that was Joe Biden's position, a guy from Pennsylvania. So I think a question that was one of the follow-ups that was missed, I think, is do you support the Biden position, or is that your position on fracking? And a couple of other just big picture issues that weren't mentioned that are important to voters. There was no question on housing affordability. That ranks as the second or third most important thing to voters in the swing states. Abortion's another issue that we spent 4 questions or 5 questions on in this debate. That ranks at 5 to 7% for voters out there. But a question about when it comes to the importance to the rest of democracy, we only had 2 questions on it.
Right.
And Pennsylvania is one of the largest senders of folks to Washington on January 6th.
Chris, let me jump in here.
It's really important to Pennsylvania.
Yeah, this is an interesting one. Let me jump in here because you mentioned Pennsylvania, and that's one of these key swing states that we keep talking about. Scott, I want to turn to you. It's been a crazy nearly 3 months of this election. The Biden-Trump debate, Biden dropping out, Harris coming in, Walz being selected, the DNC. I'm out of breath. Give us a state of the race right now. Where do things stand, and what is the status of Kamala Harris's momentum boost? Is that still there, or have things recalibrated to be a really close race?
Well, when we opened up our forecast, which is a quantitative look at the question you had, Harris had about a 57% chance of winning. Today, she sits at 55%, and that's largely due to some polls that look a little bit closer. The New York Times Siena one that you mentioned, some state polls in Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. Bottom line is the race is much closer than it was when it was Biden-Trump. And it's solidifying around basically a 50-50 race, which is about as close as we've had this century, if not the last over 100 years. Not since a Nixon-Kennedy race that was decided by a couple 100,000 votes and was down to the last state, Illinois, have we seen something this close. Any number of states and combinations, you can make the case for either Harris or Trump. The one thing I do know for sure is she's not going to run away with it 5 or 10 points, and neither is Donald Trump.
Close race, absolutely. Scott, we're out of time, but I have one more question I need to ask you. Coming here with some breaking news, Taylor Swift just said that she is going to vote for Vice President Kamala Harris. It's a coveted endorsement for the Harris-Walz campaign. Do you see that affecting polls at all? She's a very popular individual, especially among young voters, and they're key this election.
They are key, and actually we have some data on this. You know, Taylor Swift in the 2016 election did a voter registration drive in Tennessee, and she increased voter registration by about 3.5–4% measurably, which, you know, not out of this world, but certainly measurable and could make a difference in a small state. Where I think it'll help the most, fundraising, especially if she goes out on the trail for VP Harris. Money means votes because they can go ahead and do the get out the vote operations in the closing weeks. And so, yeah, no, I think the endorsement will certainly help the Harris's operation, both in fundraising and potential votes in some of these close states.
All right, we have
one quick note there, though. She came out in 2018 and endorsed the Democratic opponent to Bill Lee in Tennessee, and Bill Lee won. So, you know, she definitely will help raise money, but it doesn't guarantee a Democrat to a victory.
Debate analysis with a side of Taylor Swift hot takes. Chris Berg, Scott Tranter, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Thanks for tuning back in. I'm Robbie Suave, joined by Jessica Burbank to continue to react to the presidential debate we just saw between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. I'm not seeing anyone really online calling this a win for Donald Trump. Even people on the right conceding this was not a great night and blaming squarely the moderators for ganging up on Trump, fact-checking him, not doing the same for Kamala Harris. Noticed in particular she attributed his bloodbath comment to being a call for political violence when it refers to the economic situation he thinks would happen under the continuation of the Biden administration under Harris. That was something they didn't correct, but they corrected a lot of things Donald Trump said. So that's the kind of defensiveness the right is having about this debate, because Trump absolutely seemed to get rattled, seemed to get bogged down in talking about personal things, his business stuff, having to relitigate again the 2020 election, which is not something persuadable voters want to hear about, how he actually won it, how his actions on January 6th were not really that bad. So this did not end up being a night for Donald Trump to gain ground among the persuadable voters. The prediction markets have Harris closing that little bit of a gap that had opened up with Donald Trump being ahead in some of the prediction markets recently. Now it's again all tied up. What are your thoughts, Jessica?
Yeah, I don't think blaming the moderators is a smart strategy here. They only stepped in and corrected when it was an obvious lie. It is true that he said if he didn't win, it would be a bloodbath. She doesn't deserve, or Trump doesn't deserve additional context added to his regularly violent rhetoric. And it's true that he chooses violent rhetoric on purpose when talking about mundane things. It was a direct quote. There's nothing to correct there. I do think that Kamala Harris specifically handled in the latter half of this debate the questions about race really well. She said it's a tragedy we have someone who wants to be president throughout the course of his career has used race to divide people. And I'm paraphrasing there. It's almost an exact quote. And I think handling the race commentary in that way is really smart. She focused on the future, about how we're going to invest in the dreams and aspirations and ambitions of people, really honing in on what the rhetoric will be around the opportunity economy. And Trump's closing remarks were pretty much, these guys are bad. They're the worst, vice president and president we've ever had, really just focusing on the past. And I think that's really what hurt him, is he let Kamala Harris definitely get under his skin with a lot of the comments that she made tonight.
Yeah, I mean, I think focusing on the bad of the Biden-Harris administration is a good idea. Surveys after surveys show vast dissatisfaction among the American people with the economy, with immigration, with how things have been handled over the last 4 years. But did Donald Trump take the opportunity to explain what he's going to do differently, why his plan to fix the economy is better, why Harris is going to, I found it interesting. At one point she said, he was criticizing Joe Biden, I think, again, showing you that he really wishes he was still running against Joe Biden. And then she said, well, I am not Joe Biden and I am not Donald Trump. But of course, she's been a part of the administration. She's been responsible for the policies of Joe Biden. So does she not stand by these policies? She's at various points not really meant to explain what the differences are. But yes, it was a missed opportunity, certainly, for Donald Trump. I think if people who don't know Kamala Harris were watching and trying to decide, could I envision this person as president? I don't think she said anything so alarming, not to any near the extent of Joe Biden, obviously setting up all these alarm bells, setting off alarm bells during the last debate, causing people almost in a very non-ideological, non-partisan fashion to say, man, there is just no way this guy can be president for 4 more years. Nothing like that occurred. But I do think, you said going after the moderators is not a great strategy, but I think there's going to be some soul searching in Republican circles. I don't know who prepped Trump for this debate. It was not good. And then agreeing to do this debate when we just had a debate that was excellently moderated by CNN, where they did not jump in and try to contextualize or say, well, that's not true, or here's why that's not true. Again, the fact-checking should be done by the other candidate. Leave it to the candidates, or else it's one-sided and unfair. If they're going to do it this way, then they should have a moderator who is conservative-leaning or more friendly to Trump to do that for the Kamala statements, and then they can have those people do it for the Trump statements. So it came across to me as, and I'm not at all in the tank for or supporting Donald Trump, but it seemed pathologically that they were out to get him and did so. And so there's going to be a lot of discussion about the unfairness of that. But at the end of the day, it was on Trump to win the debate, to stay focused on the issues. He did not do that. He talked about the pet eating thing, which has been there's not reporting, and he said dogs. The meme online was A, that it was cats, and B, it's not true. There's no allegation of pets being eaten. The allegations being made in the town of Springfield, Ohio, was that wild ducks, geese, were being hunted. That's what some citizens have reported to local media and at local city council meetings, which is a very different matter, and I think is not the issue Trump wanted to or should have wanted to focus on this debate. It's how to deliver on the American dream for all Americans, how to make the economic situation better, and he got bogged down.
Right. Kamala Harris actually does have plans for precisely that. She spoke to the American dream and growing up in a middle-class family a lot tonight. She spoke specifically about her plan for startups and a part of the opportunity economy plan to have $50,000 in tax deductions. She spoke about the $6,000 that would go to young families as a tax credit in the first year of their child's life. She said this can go to, if you want to spend it on rent, if you want to spend it on a stroller, whatever the additional expenses you have. She wants to make starting a family more affordable. She also talked about allowing people to pursue homeownership, which is a big part of the American dream, with down payment assistance. Donald Trump, when asked about his health care plan that he has been promising for 9 years, gave the response, "I have concepts of a plan." To the millions of Americans that are denied necessary coverage and prolong going to the doctor because they don't have health insurance, that is not a sufficient answer. And even when he was pressed on his record, Kamala won on that. So even if you might think, inflation's been something Americans have struggled with, these past 4 years haven't been easy, in large part because of the pandemic we experienced. He even lost out when he brought up Afghanistan, because Kamala Harris brought up the actual record on Afghanistan, saying 4 presidents have said we are going to get out of Afghanistan, and Joe Biden's the only one who actually did.
But what did
Donald Trump's negotiated plan was to pull out sooner. She pointed out it was an extremely weak deal. And then actually Trump's own national security advisor said it was weak. And he bypassed the government of Afghanistan, and negotiated directly with the Taliban and invited them to Camp David. She really had a moment with that. I still think.
Do you think she had a moment with that? I thought that was a very confusing. I don't know how we can organize a withdrawal from Afghanistan without having some conversations with the Taliban. I mean, maybe if you're the most hawkish of the hawks, most interventionist, pro-regime change, we're the good guys, they're the bad guys. Maybe this is the Cheney in the Democratic Party now or something, saying it was like shameful to talk to the Taliban. I think that was like totally incoherent, and she was articulating a foreign policy vision there that was, while saying that Joe Biden was right to get out of Afghanistan, it was wrong to negotiate with the Taliban. Well, that was a part of the drawdown. So that, to me, that made absolutely no sense. And in fact, on foreign policy, there wasn't that much difference between them. They talked about Israel only very briefly. If you're someone who's a critic or skeptic of the bipartisan foreign policy consensus, I don't think you were getting significant policy differences between these candidates. 2 other quick things wanted to mention. It came up, Kamala Harris said that she is a gun owner. Did you catch that? That's news to me. I wonder where she is registered to have a gun in D.C., in California. I wondered, just asking, I have no idea what that, if that was a throwaway line or if she meant it. Of course, she should be able to own a gun like anyone else, but that was news to me, so I found that interesting. The other thing I wanted to mention is, of course, Taylor Swift has just put out her endorsement of Kamala Harris as expected. That came out now. Your thoughts, Jessica?
Yeah, I think that's huge. Absolutely huge to have Taylor Swift's endorsement. This comes as she's swirled in controversy, hanging out with Brittany Mahomes, who is seen liking posts from Donald Trump on social media. How could they be at the U.S. Open together? So her fans really wanted her to say something. They were calling on her documentary, Miss Americana, where she was extremely critical of Marsha Blackburn. And she spoke about standing up for what's right, even when it's inconvenient for you. So they really see her as someone who needs to speak about politics, because she's essentially promised that to her fan base. And so that's going to bring in a lot of young voters, a lot of women voters. A campaign official from the Harris campaign said in the 9 p.m. hour, when they were speaking on women's issues, specifically reproductive rights, 71% of grassroots donors were women. So this is a big moment for women, a big moment for the Swifties and the Gaylors. I think that, it does matter. I did hear some criticism that Taylor Swift is a bandwagoner, endorsing Kamala Harris when she's winning, dating Travis as he's winning the Super Bowl. I think, correlation is not causation. It just all happened that way. I don't think she's a bandwagoner, Robbie.
All right, we're going to continue coverage here at The Hill with Michael Schnell. Take it over.
And with only 56 days to go until Election Day, that will do it for our special coverage of America's Vote 2024. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube page. I'm Michael Schnell. See you back here at the intersection of politics and policy.